Yes, corporate propaganda functions, it works, and yes, and it's made things in the culture, from my perspective, worse, and it is still continuing that way. I do not see it going away from that. I see it going more in that, and I'm fine. I think it's very frightening.
Filmmaker Magazine presents Back to One with Peter Rinaldi.
Crispin Glover is an actor. He sat down with me on the Upper West Side of Manhattan to talk about the work.
Do you have a typical way that you like to begin your preparation process when you get a new character that you have to portray?
No, every production is unique unto itself. So obviously reading the character and the screenplay and talking to the director, is it based on something, a novel or an historical character? How much time do you have to prepare?
Yeah.
I just acted in a film that I almost turned down because of the lack of preparation time I had. And it was historical, based on real people. I only had enough time to read the script and base what I was doing on the script, and it's based on a real person, because I was in the middle of stuff. This was just this summer, but it was a nice production, and an interesting subject matter. So I did it, and I'm glad I did it.
But do you do things differently when you have that little time? Like
yes,
what does that look like?
You have to make split-second decisions, and sometimes that's not recommendable. Is there a dialect? Ideally, if you're working with a dialect, you grew up with the dialect, or you have known it for a long time, and sometimes it's mandatory, and you've just got to do something. It's preparation. The longer you can have to prepare, of course, the better.
Yeah.
But sometimes you've just got to make those decisions quickly and go for whatever the situation is. But no, I can't say there's a standard way that I prepare. It depends on what's happening.
Yeah. Are you really picky about directors at this point?
Well, there's something I try to avoid, which is, if I'm working with it's usually an inexperienced writer-director combination. The writer-director combination, if they're inexperienced, can lead to a certain kind of micromanaging because they don't. I've worked with. I will interview a director. They're interviewing me, of course, as well.
Yeah.
But I'll ask questions in a nuanced way.
Yeah.
Because I want to see. There are signs you can tell. Usually, I'm pretty good at telling. I did have one time where I did the interview and it snuck up, and I realized, I'm working with a micromanager. What happens is they an inexperienced writer-director, and it really is only that combination. It's the writer-director combination. That's inexperienced. They've had so much time that they've been on the page, and then it's difficult to get a film made. Obviously, it's so hard, and so they've gotten something together on where they got money, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
So they're very confident they've got a good screenplay, and they spend all this time making a screenplay. But usually, like, if a filmmakers come from different backgrounds. Perhaps they're an actor, or perhaps they directed stage theater, or perhaps they directed videos, or perhaps they were an editor, or perhaps they're a writer, or sometimes they're wealthy and they just want to make a movie. But they all have a slightly different approach and background. Editors, I think, can make very good directors because they know they just need this thing to
They
put
know what
together.
they
That's what the
need,
actual
yes.
thing is. And editors have been on sets more, actors have been on sets more, writers haven't been on sets so
Yeah,
much.
yeah.
So they can get locked in their head, and then if it's not exacting to what's on the page, they get worried, and they don't realize that every stage is a rewrite.
Right.
And when they're editing, it's going to be another stage of
Right.
the rewrite. And you want that. You want happy accidents. You
Right.
want things to, and it's sometimes hard to convince an inexperienced writer director of that. But I've had great experiences with first-time writer directors as well. It's a personality quirk. So I have turned down movies if I can tell somebody has that quality, because it really kills you inside.
There's no freedom then, right? It's a lack of freedom.
It's difficult. Yeah. I don't. That's something I don't enjoy.
They're just watching their babies die, right? Like they have this image in their mind of
They
what it should be.
they don't realize that they're not. They're actually watching the child
It come alive.
Come alive. Yeah. And they don't realize. That's what's
Right. That's a good way to put it.
You're
Yeah.
helping it, and then
Yeah.
I mean, but that's all. Also, the case just in general is not even having to do with writer directors. If you're going and doing something, and you're really trying hard, and you're putting everything into it, and people just don't appreciate it.
Yeah.
They don't like it.
Yeah.
I mean, I shouldn't bring it up because I really don't like talking about it, but because it's become such a well-known thing, that's what happened on Back to the Future. I not by the director, but one of the writers who is also a producer.
Yeah.
But it didn't seem like they liked what I was doing. And the film, of course, is a very successful film. People seem to like it, but when I was working on it, they didn't. It was straight. No, Zemeckis liked it, but Gale didn't. And that it really is, or I don't know what he was thinking, but it was not fun. It's not fun when you're not feeling appreciated.
Yeah. But why worry about somebody that's not the director liking?
So unfortunately, sometimes writers can they have a conceit, and they'll do things.
You have this story of very early in your career, people wanted to put you in things to the point where a studio was saying, "What do you want to do? We'll do whatever you want to do."
It wasn't a studio. No, I wish it was a studio. It was a television producer.
Okay, yeah.
Which they were successful. They did successful television productions, and they said. I was quite young. This was before Back to the Future. I was
early
either
80s,
18
right?
or 19.
Yeah.
And I was probably 19. And they said, I went into an office, and the producer fellow said, we want to do whatever you want to do. What do you want to do? I said, well, I'd like to play a character that would be differentiated from one episode to the next, so that it was a different character each episode. And he said, you can do anything you want to do except for that. I was interested in trying to be, I'd done some television stuff, which I was glad to be working, but what I had started to fall in love with around age 16, going to see the revival houses, this is 1980, I learned how to drive, and seeing the kind of, that's where I recognized art within filmmaking. So I was excited, and these were films from the 70s, 60s, 1920s, what have you. So I was excited to get into that more, the freedom I was thinking of what the film industry could be, this great thing that could question things that should be questioned. And but then as I was stepping in the early 80s and starting to get work in film, I was thinking, where are all these questions that I was excited about? It feels like it's conforming into something. And I look back, and and that was the 80s, were really, actually compared to right now,
Yes.
although that's not quite true. There are interesting things going on in film right now.
Maybe that was a little bit of a dark age for that, right? The early 80s.
It started to turn. There was definitely, there's a waxing and waning that happens in film. I would say certainly the very early advent of film, the late 1800s, of course it was expensive, so it was certain kinds of people that were making films, but it is, I love watching silent films.
Yeah. And you like pre-code stuff.
Yeah, and I like
right?
the pre-code a lot. Yeah, that's a great era as well, because you can feel after 1934 the Hays Code.
Yeah.
It made those pre-codes, the way people talk. Yeah. And the way they're interrelating, it feels more true to what was going on.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is you can tell that's 100 years, almost 100 years ago. In a few years it'll be 100, exactly 100 years.
Jeez.
And you can tell that the culture was different.
Yeah.
Very and interesting too. Like. I'm in the Czech Republic a lot, and that's a very different culture in certain ways. But 100 years ago in the United States, it was also a different culture. What we're used to would be probably a bit strange. It would be hard to fit in certain ways.
Yeah.
Although there are things that I think I would like about it. But then I think about that a lot, about what are the lost things. Every 100 years, essentially, certainly every 125 years, nobody's around that was around the 125 years before. And what are the unspoken things that are lost? We don't know.
Right.
And they could be great, huge things that we just, they slip away.
Yep.
And think there are things people write about, there are certainly things that have been photographed, painted, what have you, but what are those unspoken things that are different? They're certainly there, but what are they? I'm really interested I'd love to know what those are. It makes sense that every generation, the elder population talks about the good old days.
Yep.
Because it has to be that way, because there is a new territory, so to speak, that the next generation of people, it's their time.
Yep.
And so those people will talk about those good old days 80 years later as well, and wax nostalgia about something that I probably find really aberrant.
Yeah, exactly.
and
Exactly.
That's just how it is. It makes sense that the culture is going to continuously change.
What happened? I heard you talking about like something that shifted in terms of acting for you around the year 2000.
Well,
what was that?
I had already shot my first film, What Is It? And the second film, It Is Fine, Everything Is Fine, was with a man who'd written the screenplay, which I'd read in the 80s. 1986 was when I first read it. And he had a severe case of cerebral palsy. His name was Stephen C. Stewart. And that screenplay, I'm proud of all my films in different ways. But there's something about that screenplay that was revealed that I really am proud of that film. But I needed to get that film made. And I knew when I read it in 1986, the script was such that there was no plausible way that anybody would invest in it except for me. I knew I would have to physically be the reason that the film was financed and made. And I also needed to make money to finish What Is It, the first film. And I put Steve into What Is It in order to make his film a sequel of sorts. And I had recognized around that time that when I wrote What Is It, I had already been informed by what Steve had wrote. Steve had grown up with a severe case of cerebral palsy, and What Is It, I wrote that a majority of the characters were to be played by actors with Down syndrome, even though those characters did not necessarily have Down syndrome. So there was something about the culture, the disability culture, that I had been informed of by knowing Steve.
Yeah.
And so it actually did make sense that his screenplay predated what I wrote in
Right.
What Is It. So it was proper to do that, but I had to make some money, and I had been very particular in the 80s, as I was, and most of the 90s, as to what kinds of films I would act in, and it was good for an actor to do that.
Yeah.
But I was also very serious about my filmmaking. It's arguable that had I not switched basically, to get to the point of what you were asking, is I made a conscious decision that I would switch from acting being as my art form, my pure art form, to my filmmaking being my pure art form, and that acting would shift into being a craft that I would take seriously, but I wouldn't. I had to do that in order to be able to fund the films.
see.
I mean, it's arguable that had I stuck with the being very particular and keeping acting as my art, that I could have made more money in the long run, because when you accept roles and things that are not necessarily great for acting, you sort of sink with the ship. I was aware of this when I made the decision, but I did make the decision, and I don't regret it. I think it was the right thing to do.
And do you still feel that way about acting, like kind of like it's supplementing your other great love?
Yes, because I made the decision to do that. So there is a difference. I was in how you approach it, or how I approach it. Well, I listened to an interesting interview with Jenna Rollins talking about John Cassavetes, who they, of course, did incredible work together. And in the interview, she said something to the effect of, there was a time, I'm speaking as her, so to speak, right now. She said something like, there was a time when I recognized that John, her husband, had stepped over, and he had become more of a director than an actor. And she said, I really sort of felt sad about that, because John was such a good actor. But I know, I understand what she means by that, because problem solving is different as an actor than it is as a filmmaker.
Right.
Because as a filmmaker, there is a two-dimensional aspect that you're looking at on the screen, and of course a good director wants to get the three-dimensional undertones of the actor, but ultimately the outcome is that two-dimensional, well, unless you're directing a 3D movie, but essentially a two-dimensional image. So when you're problem solving as a director, it's a series of different steps, and when you're problem solving as an actor, often, particularly if you're coming from anything that's sort of post-Stanislavski internal-based decision-making for the character, you're ideally making those decisions for the internal aspects of the character. Although, I mean, that's not 100% true. I think even Stanislavski would admit to there's an evident external element. People have to hear what you're saying or see you or what have you to some extent.
Yeah. But this is, see, I'm about to tell you how much I love this film that I just saw last week, the world
good.
premiere. So I don't want you to take this wrong.
Yeah.
But is there something that could have happened where you would never think, I want to be a filmmaker and I really love this craft of acting? In other words, would it have been like some kind of
absolutely
relationship?
Had the industry been what I was looking for when I went and saw those great films in the 80s, I would have been totally happy to be an actor within these questioning films. It's just there was a sharp turn in what I have been outspoken about corporate interest propaganda, which is what I really see the 99.99% of filmmaking is corporate interest propaganda. I mean, we're also talking a little bit about Mr. K here, I know. So I like Mr. K by the fact that it is something that lets people think. They can become involved in interpreting things.
Yeah.
That's something I appreciate. So, but and of course, as a filmmaker, that's very much what I'm intending. I mean, even if I have very specific things I'm wanting to get across in some way or another, I'm very aware that it's most important for an audience to be able to make the decisions, because then they are engaged truly.
Yes.
If they're on some level somehow become a part of the thought process, that's real engagement.
Yes. You know, I rarely feel privileged in a movie theater, like the feeling of feeling privileged. I usually am angry, or I'm bored, or I'm on a rare occasion entertained or enlightened. I felt privileged at MoMA last week.
Oh, good.
At the premiere of your film, which took you 13 years, 15 years, maybe more to make.
Yeah, I'm not happy about that.
But I think that if you don't know how long it took you, you would still know that this is something very, very special that is unlike any other film I have ever seen. And maybe it took someone, the feeling I felt was that there was somebody at the helm of this film who is uncompromised in any way, shape, or form. And that is very rare, to feel the director is not compromising in the storytelling, in every aspect. You feel like, and also to have that same feeling go hand in hand with also feeling like you're in good hands and safe hands, meaning in terms of an actual artist. Because sometimes you could feel that but not feel like you're in safe hands. You could feel like, wow, this is a little crazy and I don't understand this. But instead I felt exhilarated and excited and privileged.
That's great. I mean, that's like a great review. I'm very happy to hear that. I will say that I agree that the time that it took to make the film, on some level, yes, you can feel it. Like, there was no way for me to make the film, because there's two titles, Know You're Wrong or Spooky Action at a Distance. Know You're Wrong portion of the film predated Spooky Action at a Distance. Mm-hmm. And so the Know You're Wrong part took a number of years to shoot, and then the whole other turn of Spooky Action at a Distance also took a number of years. And then there were things that happened in the interim of what the concept of Spooky Action at a Distance was, that kept essentially proving the hypothesis of what spooky action.
I know what you mean.
I'm using a scientific term.
Yes.
So it's not the same scientific term as what the the physics element of Spooky Action at a Distance. I'm playing with it poetically, but it is strange to me. There were strange things that happened that I still don't know how to describe, and that it's in, and that, yes, all of that had to happen in order for it to be a part of the film.
Right.
So,
Right.
And I mean, there's even stuff that just my father died in March,
Right.
and then there's stuff having to do with that, which was already predated in some of the stuff that we'd shot. So there's strange things. I don't know what if you're picking up on the things that I'm talking about. You're saying that there's some things you hadn't seen. I'm curious what you mean by that. Like there was something that you said you had not seen in film before. Or
Well,
something.
what I mean is that the hand of the filmmaker wasn't tied down to things that usually lead to me being slightly bored by a work.
What would you say those things are?
Narrative structure, formula and structure. But anytime somebody sways off that, though, they also usually lose me anyway.
Well, that's something I think about a lot, is structure. And on this particular film, I was thinking about it a lot. The original "Know You're Wrong" was there was a structure book I read that I purchased online. It was really expensive. It was something. This is in around 2006 or something. It was I think it was $250. And in 2006, that was even more.
Yeah.
Expensive, but I was intrigued by what the guy. The title was something like 250 stages in hero's journey structure.
Huh.
And I love Here with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, and he has, I'm not sure, the monomyth stages, he has a number of them.
Yeah.
They're
I thought there's only like 12.
Something like that. and so I thought, well, 250, that's interesting. What is this guy doing? So and he had some other kind of, I can't remember what I saw. If it was some social media thing that intrigued me. So I bought the book, and it was actually really helpful, mainly about the romantic interest characters, the old world romantic interest and the new world romantic interest, which I never really understood that until I read that book, and how important that was for the structure of the character. And what I had initially intended to write, there was a different screenplay, which I sort of reference in the movie. There was a different screenplay that I'd written that was for myself and an actress who I dated, and she was very good at character work. And I had written something for her and I to play these different characters in the screenplay, where it was just two people, and it was a way to make a film that would be inexpensive but also entertaining and interesting. And for various reasons that I didn't make that film. I still have the script. I'd still like to make it. It was a good script. But then I started focusing on making something for myself and my father. I realized, okay, well, I can make something along that lines where it just would be only myself and my father.
Yeah.
No other characters. And if there were other characters, they'd be on the telephone or a shadow or a silhouette. But then I started writing the romantic interest characters, and as soon as the first scene I wrote, I realized this has to be a flesh and blood person. So that sort of went out the window in a way. But it's even still, I represented the other than the female romantic interest characters, there's other characters that are still sort of almost not human in a way. And so structure. I'm also very interested in surrealism.
Yes.
And Luis Buñuel. You hear people talking about structure or read a lot of. I've read a lot of structure books, and there's two films that they almost always reference, in almost every structure book I've read. One of them is The Godfather, and the other one is Chinatown.
I was just going to say Chinatown.
Which my father happens to be in, and I happen to have been on the set. One day, it was the day that, it was before the night shoot of the final scene. I was in Chinatown. My mother and father and I went to a restaurant called Amy Lou's, which we dined at before, and we sat, and I remember looking out the window, looking at the construction of the... They were putting up the period signage with cranes. I was interested in that. My father was friendly with Roman Polanski, and they would play chess. And so for some reason, my mother didn't come with us. She stayed at Amy Lou's, and then my father and I walked over to Roman Polanski's trailer, and there was a chessboard there, and my father introduced me to Roman Polanski, and of course, he's Polanski about to direct the final scene. He had some papers, and he was, he met me, but he had other things to understand what he'd be thinking about. And my father made a chess move. We didn't stay in too long, but I'm very grateful that I had that with that particular film, that I was there for that particular scene.
Right.
And I didn't see that film. I didn't see R-rated films when I was a kid, so I didn't see that film until an adult. And the first time I saw it, I liked it, but I wasn't. I had seen Repulsion by Polanski, which I loved Repulsion, and so I didn't like it as much as Repulsion. But I've seen it many times since, and I was on an airplane watching it on the way to the Czech Republic, I don't know, more than a decade ago, and I suddenly realized there was a structural element to it that made me realize what an amazingly great film it is. And what it was is that I recognized that the protagonist character of the film is not the Jack Nicholson character. The protagonist, strangely, of the film, structurally, is the John Huston character. The antagonist, structurally, of the film is the Faye Dunaway character. And we watch... which is completely perverse. Because of what he does. But it's this grand palette, beautiful photography, beautiful structure, in playing on kind of Hollywood glamour, so to speak, about an incredibly perverse element of power. Perversion. It's just, what an amazing film.
But it took you a couple times,
It took me many times. I did and partially because of my study of structure. And I was on a plane, I wasn't thinking about it too much. I just thought, well, I'll watch this. And I realized that's why this film is amazing. And I've never seen anybody say that in the structure books. Nicholson is the main character, but he doesn't. We just watch that story through his eyes. He doesn't, because the way I realized to analyze hero's journey structure. I think it's a mistake the way people analyze it, because if you're looking at it in terms of Joseph Campbell doesn't go into a lot of the details that people stay on. It's much looser and much stranger, and yes, you could even call it surreal. He wouldn't have used that term, but surrealism and hero's journey structure go hand in hand. So Louise Buñuel's Un Chien Andalou and L'Âge d'Or are at least as structurally integrated as something like Star Wars.
That's crazy.
It just has it isn't crazy though, because it's just a different way of looking at it.
Interesting.
Because these things are played at in certain ways. See, so I was glad to hear about what you said about the film, about being frustrated by. Sometimes you get frustrated when you see people sticking to structure, or if they stay away from structure, which I agree both can be mistakes, because there's something, it's the surprise of good structure should ideally be surprising.
Yes.
Because if it isn't surprising, the audience gets ahead of you, like you're saying, and you get bored.
Yes.
But if you have structure and almost float other things on top of it, then it can be a surprise.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
And that's what Buñuel does. And that's why, to me, surrealism is important. And surrealism, if you read Buñuel's My Last Sigh, he goes into great detail about that. All the people that were the capital S members of the surrealist group, if they saw what they were, that they, in the future, looked forward to 30, 40, however many years later, and they saw that they had, if they saw they had plays, paintings in museums, movies made, what have you, books published, they would all universally say what they had done was a failure because they were a political organization. So in Paris at that time, there were these cafes where one cafe was dedicated to the fascists, another cafe was the anarchists, another cafe was the social democrats, and one cafe was the surrealists. They were a political organization. They were not an arts organization. And I understand what that means.
Yeah.
I've read there's a number of surrealist manifestos. I've read them. They're very confusing and purposefully so, I'm sure. But there's a utopianism in it, and I would assume they sort of knew it, maybe, but they were also serious about it, because Buñuel said that in his the same autobiography that somebody I can't remember who it was, in the surrealist group came to him and said, your film, if it's this great surrealist work, because there was a rebellion in the surrealist element. So if it was conforming, he was convincing Buñuel that if it was conforming to something that became a sort of, they weren't necessarily anti-capitalist, but they were not necessarily pro-capitalist, but there was an argument that was, that this meant it wasn't surrealist if it was this thing, so that Buñuel in a surrealist act needed to destroy the film. And Buñuel was convinced by it, and he had the film, and he was on his way to destroy it. And luckily, somebody came and said, "Don't! This is crazy. Do not do this." I think it was another person in the surrealist group. Of course,
was that Un Chien Andalou or another film?
This was Un Chien Andalou. I think I said L'Âge d'Or, but it was Un Chien Andalou. Yeah, his first film. And luckily, I mean, of course, I admire things about the surrealists, but like any group, it becomes hypocritical at some point. So luckily, we still have the print, because it's a great film. But I would argue that I would say Un Chien Andalou and L'Âge d'Or are his two most prototypical surrealist of his films. And I love all of his films until his death. But those really, and they were made in the 20s and 30s, and I would still say you can point out structural elements, but it's a part of what is fascinating about the hero's journey structure is you almost can't tell a story, because when Dali and Buñuel wrote the script together, and that predated them being in the surrealist group. After Buñuel made the film, he went up to Paris and he showed the film to the surrealists, and they invited him in immediately. And then he said, "You have to meet my friend Dali," and then Dali came up, and then they immediately invited him in. Of course, he's the person people think of most, is Dali. But Buñuel was in the group before Dali.
Interesting.
But Buñuel said when they were writing Un Chien Andalou together, the idea was that they wanted to make sure things didn't correlate, which is a surrealist. I'm sure they were understanding of the surrealist principles even before they were members of it. And Buñuel, when I was reading both that book and his In Conversations With, which was a sister book to My Last Sigh, when I was editing What Is It, I wanted What Is It to have surrealist and even Dadaist elements in it. And he was very succinct, and I don't think he was lying in saying that he never put the meanings behind the
Images.
elements that were not necessarily connected. Other people do that, and
Right.
that is a part of what people do. There's
Right.
something about you.
It's almost
if you
like a
tell a
knee-jerk-
story,
yeah.
it's internal.
Yeah.
It's instinctual.
Right.
Which is
We
one of
want-
the most fascinating subjects.
Desperately to something that makes sense, right?
Yes,
In
we
any
do
way
that. Yes,
possible.
we that's a nature of Homo sapiens, is that
Yeah.
we make sense out of disparate elements, which is
Right.
part of what surrealism identified, which I think is what is the greatest aspect of what the surrealists did. They didn't invent
Right.
that, but they identified it, and that's really important for all aspects of art.
And would you say that, in a way, you were reading this Campbell book because you were trying to find out how to break the rules by learning the rules in more depth?
Well, I mean, I think the so-called rules you need to break in
Right.
order to make genuinely good story
Yes.
structure.
Yes.
Because if you just follow the pattern, then you're not ahead of the audience,
Right.
and you'll lose the engagement.
But if you break them wrong, like you said, or like I tried to tell you, right, then you lost me also.
Well, but breaking wrong is the way to break them wrong is to conform to an idea. The way to break them right is, I mean, but I was very, and all of my films I've been very adherent to some aspects of the hero's journey structure.
Yeah,
You don't
yeah.
have to have every aspect of
Yeah.
every story, but recognizing which things serve. I mean, if you have all the aspects that Campbell or other people have identified since, that's great too. But it is important to have. If it becomes if the audience gets ahead of you, then they're going to rebel, and they're not going to enjoy it.
Yeah.
So I mean, I know I'm really glad to hear what you said about the film, because that was something that I wasn't sure of until I showed it, had the premiere at MoMA. I was very happy with the reception, for one thing, because there was the amusing things. Mostly the amusing stuff is in the spooky action at a distance part of the film, and much of that's with myself and my father. And I knew it was my feeling was that it was amusing. I mean, it's played seriously. A lot of it's he and I arguing about things, but I felt that would be amusing. But I also felt that it would be the kind of amusing that is an internal amusement, not something that would be laughing out loud necessarily. But it was interesting to me, because that's the kind of thing you can't tell until you're with an audience, and it was consistent. That it was the areas where I did think of the things as being amusing, where there was laughter out loud, but also that it happened late in the movie, which was in the midst of stuff that isn't funny at all.
Right.
So I could tell, oh, that's good. This means there's genuine engagement and comprehension.
Yes.
And that was then that was the other thing I didn't know, is what will people comprehend?
Right.
I was ready for people not to comprehend at all.
Yeah.
My first film, What Is It? I would say, and it's sort of purposeful, there's humor in that film as well. But when I listen to the audience quite regularly, there's particular patterns of how the audience will react. There are places that the audience will laugh where I find things amusing. Then there are places where the audience will laugh where I didn't think anything was amusing at all. And then there are places where I laugh that the audience definitely is not laughing, and it's actually the parts that I find the most humorous because it was designed that way, and I know the audience is extraordinarily uncomfortable, which makes me laugh because it was designed that way. But the new film is not part 1 and 2 of the trilogy, which are designed about essentially a commentary on taboo, which is the other part of what's deeply in our culture now is the corporate control that we don't even, it's so normal that people don't realize how much it is in our everything. And that people get uncomfortable if it's being pointed out, which is what the point of what is. The people think, oh, it's just perverse, but there is a specific point, but it's also not contained within the film, which is why I go and I have a Q&A with that film in particular. Is not that I want to answer specific questions about things, but at least put it in context.
Yeah.
But on that level, like when Buñuel showed, Unchi and Andalou didn't have violent reactions, but his second film, L'Âge d'Or, did. And it played for less than a week because people were getting angry and slashing paintings in the lobby of the film, and they didn't continue playing it, and then it wasn't shown for decades. But I was looking. I understood things that we find quaint now that Buñuel was reacting to and portraying in both of those films. People got really mad. Now it's like, because it was a Catholic culture, and particularly in the second film, there are things that. I mean, I was not raised religiously with any religious instruction. If anything, I was raised almost kind of anti-organized religion. But I mean, I recognize the positive aspects of morality in general. But the iconography that was used in L'Âge d'Or, I don't recognize because I do not know too much about Catholicism, but I can tell that there's some stuff that I guess it would be considered blasphemy, even if it's just using the imagery in a way that is not the way it's supposed to be used. I didn't find it terrible, and I think most audiences, because both Christianity and Catholicism have been open to a lot of satire for a long time now. So people don't get too upset about it, which is good. It's good that, but it makes what was quite controversial 100 years ago seem quaint. But I was interested in finding things that are taboo in this culture, and of course it happens.
Do you think that that's changing now from what your film, in terms of when you bring these films now on the road again now?
If I what is it will have more problems now than I'm serious.
You know what that means to me? That we have regressed.
Oh yes, no. The corporate propaganda functions. I've been aware of this since acting in Back to the Future. It became crystal clear to me because of very specific things that were in the screenplay. There was stuff that got changed in the screenplay. I haven't talked about that, and I really should, because it's to my own detriment that I haven't talked about it. But there were things that I've talked about, the things that, or people have talked about the things that didn't get changed, but there were things that did get changed in the script because my character, they didn't allow me to read the screenplay before I agreed to it. And that's something that hasn't been apparent either. So then I'm having to correlate what the character's doing, and there was stuff in the character. You hear people talking about movies in the 80s now that they've not aged well, and that the stuff that was changed because I said something about it, absolutely people would not be liking it in Back to the Future. So I helped the thing, and instead I've been attacked.
Yeah, exactly. You should be getting some credit for that.
Whatever. But yes, corporate propaganda functions. It works, and yes, and it's made things in the culture from my perspective, worse. And it is still continuing that way. I do not see it going away from that. I see it going more in that.
Exactly.
And I'm fine. I think it's very frightening.
Yes.
And then there's these social justice movements, which can also be justified as things to basically let corporate. It can be chosen as to who's allowed or to be hurt in the culture. It's very disturbing. It's concerning.
We're going to have to consider this part 1 because we are at the end of our time. Okay. Can we do that? Can we
Absolutely.
one day do a part 2 here?
Sure. Yeah. I'm here, and you mean sooner?
Well, I'm here. I would love that.
Yeah. I'm here. At the IFC for a week. I'm perfectly happy to come back and continue because this is a good conversation.
Yes, Crispin Glover. Thank you so.
Thank you. And just for the end of part 1, obviously I'm here at the IFC. I have 2 days doing a Q&A with Mr. K.
Yes.
Which luckily that film does have something where people can interpret.
And it's a wonderful film, yeah.
And it's not bad corporate propaganda, which is nice. And then my own film, which it's not part 1 and 2 of the trilogy, but I think I innately have something in me that it's in there no matter what. But it's not visceral. Anyhow, people can find. I'll be there for a week, performing the live shows, showing the film, and then people should sign up on crispinglover.com to know when I'm where with what shows and films.
I can't recommend your film highly enough. I mean, in this time right now, just go if you want to just go see something that you will never see anything else like it. Like, how many times can you say that about something? Okay.
Well, good. I'm very, very pleased.
But also, you're going to be doing will you do the slideshow at the beginning?
Oh yeah, I always do.
I mean, that's not worth the money. I don't know what is.
And the reason I do that is because the books always were in that surreal realm. So especially if people are coming into the theater from, maybe the last thing they saw was a superhero movie or something. It helps to segue into a kind of a mindset that's a little bit different than that. But I'd love to come back. It was a very enjoyable conversation.
Thank you.
And I'm so glad
so
you have been getting that out of it.
Yes.
So we'll talk soon.
Back to One is a production of Filmmaker Magazine, which is a publication of The Gotham. Listen to back episodes of this podcast at filmmakermagazine.com or wherever you get your podcasts.